Great to see you.
How's my audio? Is that okay?
Loud and clear.
Yeah, I have got a loud voice.
No. Ruth McGowan has said hello, Kate.
Hello, Ruth. Fantastic.
So, Kate, Cynthia may have mentioned too that everyone else is on mute. We control the world here at the moment, but you'll see in the chat box that there's conversations that will occur. That's going to be my role this afternoon, is to keep an eye on the chat and see what the themes emerging. Cynthia is going to be the interviewer, and we'll probably want to start. Cynthia, we're at 40 now, 41. Everyone's popping in. They've grabbed their lunch. Hopefully their cuppa.
There's a few familiar faces on that list, which is nice, I think.
That's lovely. Yeah, so...
And we've got a few, it's terrific to see we've, as Louise termed them, we've got our frequent flyers to the program. So we've got a few people who have come along. This is our 4th Wellbeing Wednesday. So it's terrific to see some new faces today and some familiar names up there. And so, so we're going to go till 2 o'clock, and then the last couple of weeks we've just been staying open for those who want to hang around and have a bit more of a relaxed chat afterwards. Kate's happy to stay around. We've sort of been hanging around for about half an hour, 3/4 of an hour afterwards. So if you want to, you don't have to, but we'll officially end proceedings at 2 and then just have a bit more of a casual chat. So we'll get started, Louise.
Okay, thank you, Cynthia, and welcome, Kate. Yes, so Cynthia said this is our 4th webinar, our Wednesday Wellbeing webinar, and it is great to welcome back our frequent flyers. We'll need to come up with another term for that. And I suppose we will ask a few questions throughout the hour, and the first one that we're curious to know, Cynthia and I, is those that have returned, which is fabulous. What have you implemented? What did you commit to at the closure of one of the first 3, or who've been to the 3, attended the 3 webinars? What have you committed to in the chat room? And we're really curious to find out what have you seen as an outcome of that implementation. So I'll let you go onto the chat box to start with that. We'll keep an eye on it. And just very quickly, an introduction. So Cynthia and I came about as a relationship many years ago through Leadership Victoria, where we were pulled together to co-facilitate a leadership program there, which continues today out of Melbourne, probably now, probably as a webinar, I suspect. And we found that we were very much different, and very different approach in how we operate, and that enabled us to see different perspectives of how we looked at leadership. And we then colluded and came up with a few programs: Driving Your Life, responding to the continuous question, what will I do with my life? And we found the average age of a 35, 40-year-old was asking. We then narrowed our focus to working on wellbeing, and then took us to a online and a face-to-face workshop focusing on the wellbeing of women. And we've just continued to focus in that area and go on our own travels as well. So I'm at the home school here. I've got my husband in the background sharing the same office. He's a teacher, started teaching back online today, and I've got a daughter in her bedroom. She's back in class, and a son that starts back tomorrow, and my mother is also here at the moment. So I've got a backdrop there of my garden in case there's frequent travellers through the office, so hopefully there's no distractions. Quick intro from you, Cynthia.
Yes, Cynthia Marnie, run my own leadership development practice, coaching. Wellbeing's a big part of it, so I'm very interested in how we keep performing, particularly when we're going through difficult times. And so I look at that from a leadership development perspective, from a team's perspective, and also from an individual perspective. And for me, well-being is one of the foundations of us being able to perform at our best. And I reckon, though, at the moment, we probably need to do a little bit of recalibrating as to what does our high performance now look like in this time of weirdness. Like, I don't think when we're working from home or, and, you know, lots of people said, oh, I find working from home really easily. It's just now I've got the kids there as well. So I'm actually not finding it as easy as I used to. So it's like, we can't keep up the pace that we probably did at work. So what now for you right now, one of the things I'd like you to have a think about is what does your definition now of high performance look like? And it might be going for a walk once a day. It might be only doing 2 Zoom meetings, because lots of people are getting really exhausted, I think, by the online interaction. So I think that's a conversation, you know, about adjusting our expectations and recalibrating for this weird time that we're in. So that's one of the things I'm interested in, and just really love the opportunity to bring people together. And so hence Wellbeing Wednesdays was born, because Louise and I both have this passion for wellbeing. And yeah, we just thought we've got all these awesome rural, regional and remote women in our network, and how good would it be to access some of the wisdom from them and bring anyone who's interested together to have a chat about wellbeing to help us keep performing over the next few months.
Excellent. So I'll be getting you in a moment to introduce Kate formally and to interrogate her. But just in the meantime, a couple of chats, and you should all be able to see that, but I wanted to highlight, hello Charlie. We have got a comment from Charlie. Hey all, I had promised to do a bit more exercise, and I have, although it's been, move my screen, I'm missing some words here. Oh, I can't see it all. Although it's been something, getting
more, it's been more getting moving.
Ah, thank you. How about I move this a bit? There we go. Lost it. Moving
rather than serious strides towards to get fit.
Yeah, okay. I expect more, Charlie. Come on, you can do a bit more. They've got a lot of land there to get out there. Hello, Virginia. You are a returned frequent flyer of not only our conversation on the webinar, but also workshops. I committed to incorporating mindfulness into my daily practice. I find it very helpful in difficult and stressful times and really helps with well-being. That's fabulous. And Jenny O'Sullivan. I see this time as a chance to recharge. I'm welcoming the quiet. The change feels a little uncomfortable, but that is normal with change, hey? Fantastic, thank you. So, Cynthia, just some tips around operating in this environment using Zoom. Yep. What do you suggest?
Yep, so for those who are new to the Zoom environment, if you, first of all, I'm hoping that you're seeing Kate, Louise and I all at once. And if you're only seeing one of us, I'd recommend that you go to the, put your cursor to the top right-hand side and choose gallery view. Otherwise, when there's a bit of back and forth, you get, if you've just got one speaker, it can get a bit dizzying. Down the bottom, if you put your cursor down the bottom, you'll see at the moment we've got 50 people with us. So that's terrific. We had 61 register. So really pleased that most people have managed to get along. You've got a Q&A box. So if you want to ask Kate a question, you can write it in the Q&A box, but just the 3 of us will see it. No one else will see it. You've also got a chat box there, and I would, Charlie's just said, you're a bully, Louise. I'm happy with my baby steps. In the right-hand side, so when you click chat box, on the right-hand side, you should be able to see the chat box. Could everyone please choose, you'll see a little 2, all panelists, and then you'll see all panelists and attendees. So if you can click all panelists and attendees, and that way everyone can see your comments, whereas if it's only all panelists, only Louise, Kate and I will see them. Just to let you know also that we are recording this, this chat, and it will be available on my website tonight or tomorrow for others who might have missed it. So that's one reason we're not showing people's faces. We just thought with privacy, it might be better to keep it as a webinar. However, just keep in mind that people will, when they go to view the video, they will be able to see the chat. So just keep in mind that we want you to be honest and open and share freely, and also just be aware that you know, the world, the outside world, will be able to see what you've written in the chat box. Just from a privacy point of view, we were attempting to Facebook live stream this, but something's happened and it hasn't worked. So I will investigate that, and we'll hopefully have that on for next week. And yeah, I think we're right on ready to go, Louise.
Okay, so I'm in charge of the clock as well, Cynthia and Kate.
Please, Louise. So I would like to give a huge welcome to a wonderful, wonderful woman from Echuca Way in northern Victoria, and she is an agricultural consultant. She runs a business called Think Agri. She's hugely talented. She's got a PhD in something that she'll tell us about. What is it, Kate? PhD in what?
Agronomy and plant breeding is probably the simplest way to describe it.
So plant stuff. That's what she's got a PhD in. And she works a lot with farmers and farmer groups in rural communities. She's also, though, she's such an honest, open, generous person. She's very courageous, and she's experienced her own, as she said in her bio, she was a bit of a late bloomer when it came to well-being. And so she's learnt a lot through her own well-being challenges. And that's why Louise and I really wanted to interview her today, because we know from talking to our clients and our networks that through this time, there's so many challenges. Lots of people are doing it a bit tough, struggling with their well-being. And so we thought Kate would have some really great tips through her own lived experience around well-being and mental health to share. So it gives me great privilege to welcome Kate.
Thanks, Synth. Thank you.
Oh, you've gone all shy.
Yeah, I'm a bit shy. This is, believe it or not, something you might not have known about me.
No.
It's a bit overwhelming.
No. So, Kate, can you just start off by just telling us, I've given a little bit of bio, but just sort of what your day-to-day is, number one, so kind of what you do, and then number two, just I'm interested, like, Echuca had a little bit of not the Ruby Princess, but another passenger from a cruise ship, and yeah, just kind of what you're noticing about the community, people you're interacting with at the moment with how they're travelling.
Yeah, okay. Thanks, Synth. Thank you, Synth. Yeah, so I have been in Echuca, or my husband and I have been in Echuca in this little house since midway through 2015. And I started a consulting practice. I saw people thought, if, you know, Cynthia Marnie can do this, so can I. And so, yeah, finally got the confidence to set up my own business. I was sort of getting a bit old and grumpy to be doing what other people were telling me to do. So I decided I needed to do what I wanted to do. And so that really has involved in a combination of the technical side of farming, like grains has been my background, but really the people and the business side, and putting those three things together, because often it's businesses or messages coming out of farming groups often focus on one of those things, usually the technical, and in the case of, you know, business consultants, often the business side, but it's often the people bit that gets missed. And so that's what I was passionate about, and so far so good. I've worked with a range of different clients and people, as you alluded to, and I do that deliberately as I suppose a business risk sharing thing, but also for stimulation as well. it's so good being up here in Echuca where there's so many different types of agriculture and still being close to Melbourne. In terms of what's happening in Echuca and COVID, it was like any other place. It was all a bit weird for starters. And there was some uncertainty. There was a couple of cases early on in the piece, and one of those cases had been around town a little bit. Those first sort of 10 to 12 days after that, things were a little tense, but things seem to have settled down now. Most people are self-isolating. There's another case in the area, and there's been some cases about 50 k's away that I know of. And probably our biggest challenge is we're a border town. So we have Victorians like ourselves under one set of rules. We've got people whose kids go to school in New South Wales. We're involved in a golf club. I'm on the board of the golf club, which is a New South Wales based golf club and under New South Wales rules. And we are actually allowed to stay open for golf only under restricted circumstances. But we've copped a bit of criticism for that. And then other people, when we did shut down for a few days, we copped criticism for that. So, but it's quite challenging being on the border. But all in all, we're very fortunate at this stage.
And Kate, how have you found being, you are head of the golf club on the board, and you're a bit of a community leader. How have you been finding that role, I guess, in your community?
It was really interesting because I was actually away when it all sort of started to hit the fan, and we were in Tasmania. Glad we're not there now. And so my first week back, you have that post-holiday, I always call it post-holiday depression, where you feel like you've been hit by a truck. Well, that was when all the COVID stuff was starting. So, when we were getting, and some of the rules were changing. And so there was a lot going on. I had my first, in the first hour of sort of being in work mode, I had a text from a major client saying we're going to cancel a workshop we'd been running. So I was straight away back on text, so please speak to me before you do that. So I managed to talk them into doing that online, and we delivered that last week. We had 16 participants from all around Australia and one overseas, and it came off a treat, and we were able to reach the outcomes they needed. So I had that going on, had back and forth phone calls from the golf club, and we ended up having something like 4 board meetings in 5 days to work. It's a major business. 140 people have been stood down. So yeah, we'll be okay long term, but it's quite challenging for that group of people and to support the staff and the key managers in what they're doing, and the chairman. And I'm someone who asks a lot of hard questions, so I've had to really balance and be aware of being thorough and asking the hard questions, but being mindful of not to put people under unnecessary pressure, and be mindful not to micromanage, which is a tendency of mine when I'm under pressure. And I know I've got a tendency to be a bit critical when I'm under pressure too. So yeah, I've had to be really mindful about myself and lock myself away a few times.
And so that, how did you see that other people were reacting as well? Like what was going on for other?
You could see a lot of people were under pressure in various aspects of, I suppose, my life, community and some work colleagues and clients, and also the golf club stuff. So, and at home too. And once I sort of was able to, take a step back and think about it and realise that we're all under pressure and all this unprecedented challenge. Like my brother works in management at Bendigo Health, so he was under pressure. And, my sister works for the Ballarat Catholic Education Office, and most of her work is travelling. Just was able to sort of take a deep breath and say, well, everyone's under pressure, so you just have to be a bit more forgiving than we always sometimes are, and just be a bit kinder to everyone.
And Kate, that's a really big theme of yours, isn't it? Compassion and kindness. Can you tell us a bit more about what that means to you and where that came from, that interest and philosophy?
Actually, a good friend that some of you would know, Amy Fay, said to me on the phone the other day when we were discussing this, she said, in really difficult times, compassion's all we've got. And I really like that. And I guess inherently kindness and compassion is something that's a big theme in our family, and it's always been there. What I didn't realise until probably the last 10 years, that I was very good at being kind to others, except when I was cranky, but but not very good at being kind to myself. And I was very empathic towards others, but I was very hard on myself. And I reckon the penny didn't really drop until I was at a little workshop in Moama one day, and a lady called Cynthia Marnie started talking about the harsh inner critic and all the voices in people's heads, and a bit of a penny drop that day. So thanks, Synth.
Ooh. Pleasure. So what penny dropped for you?
Oh, that my inner critic was always on, and the pressure that I would put on myself to perform, and that had been going on for a long, long time. And so managing that, and people would say to me, particularly in more recent years when, I've sort of been working through things, and people would say, oh, geez, you're hard on yourself. But I had, the penny just didn't drop for a long, long time, how hard I was on myself. So be kind to yourself, people.
Oh, look, I think we all need to remember that, particularly right now when many of us are under a lot of pressure. And actually, Amy Silver posted a video today, who's a colleague of Kate and I, and you should check her out. She's really lovely, and she's a psychologist, and she's fabulous. But she posted a little tip about who do you want to be, like who do you want to be right now, and when. So just thinking about that for yourself as you're going through these times, and so being kind to others, but also showing that to yourself as well. I'm just going to close my window because there's work going on outside, but can I
just check in then,
yeah,
Cynthia?
Yeah.
We've had a great question. I think we were kind of tapping into it before. The question, Kate, is how have you found the aggressive rhetoric of some country towns telling city people to stay away when those city people might be agribusiness essential workers? Just wondering if we could slip that in at the moment.
Yeah, it's interesting. I guess people don't know what they don't know. I've tended to try and ignore that aggressive rhetoric, and also, there's a lot of armchair experts at the moment, and we saw a lot of it during the bushfires too. And it's a natural response to anxiety and uncertainty is to be a bit of an expert and be attacking. So I coined a phrase called conscious ignorance, and so I really make an effort, because those sort of uninformed high horse stuff just does my head in, and so I make a conscious effort literally to ignore it. So for example, if there's something on TV like a documentary about, and you just know what direction it's going in, I just don't watch it. And yeah, I've just really tried to stay away from those uninformed stuff. I check in early on. I was checking in every day to see what the disease rates were doing and things like that. With an ag science background, I sort of understand epidemiology and curves and things, and found myself explaining to my husband and a couple of mates why, you know, what we were trying to do with flattening the curve and putting that in terms of managing stripe rusting crops. And it seemed to get the message through. But I've really, if there's media types that push my buttons, or people on social media, I've really tried to ignore all that, because it's, you know, we've only got a limited amount of energy, and as since said, we're probably only half as capable of being half of our total productive selves. So I just can't afford to be getting cranky with people that don't really know what they're talking about.
It's so true, Kate. I am a massive armchair expert. I know everything about everything corona.
Oh, I'm pretty good too. Just ask my husband. He gets the benefit of my wisdom every day.
So, Kate, just getting back to then when you've said that you were a bit of a latecomer to wellbeing, and you did have a little bit of a light bulb moment during a workshop, but how did it play out for you when you weren't looking after your wellbeing, and what would go on for you?
Yeah, okay, it's a good question, Cynthia. I guess I'll sort of start back at the very beginning, as they would say in The Sound of Music. You know, we look at genetics, and we sort of, in our family, we look at our pot bellies and skinny ankles and say, oh, thanks, Mum, and thanks, Dad. There was actually a genetic predisposition to anxiety there. I didn't know it at the time, and probably depression as well. So we were genetically primed for those sorts of things. I'm the youngest of 6, you know, and I've got distinct memories of Dad wandering around under stress and not talking for extended periods of time. Dad was probably undiagnosed depression and definitely very anxious. You know, one of my brothers is similar, so a bit of a family history. Growing up as the youngest of 6 and probably the most academic of the family, I guess there was an expectation that I would perform well. I reckon in year 12 was probably the first time that my performance came under pressure, and I didn't actually realise it at the time, but I probably had a bit of depression and anxiety flaring up then, to a point that it was impacting again at uni, in the sort of the business end of uni, 3rd and 4th year, probably same sort of thing. Again, didn't really realise that there was a thing going on. Went off, started working, ended up working at Longeron Ag College teaching, and started doing a PhD through Melbourne Uni, and then went into ag consulting. And I started ag consulting at the beginning of those drought years, and I was still writing up my PhD, so I was working most weekends as well. And when I look back, you know, I probably for 14 years, I just worked my butt off, both. And we did a house renovation, and during those drought years, I remember in 2005 thinking, oh God, don't tell me it's going to be another dry year. I don't know whether, you know, I thought droughts were only supposed to happen once every 20 years. So I could, and I was really quite stressed about the PhD stuff at that time, and I just managed to finish it. By 2006, I was quite cooked, but not willing, and probably not thinking that I could just manage it myself. And back then there was a bit of stigma about mental health. So, you know, didn't do anything about it. But really what I was starting to have was compassion fatigue, because I was absorbing everyone else's stress and, you know, all these farmers' stress, and living in a community and people asking you every 5 minutes when it was going to rain, and all you wanted to do was say, fucked if I know. I hope you don't mind me swearing, but, you know, I think it pretty much sums it up. And but came out of that and started walking with some friends at 6 o'clock in the morning, and that was a really important thing, and that really did help balance it out. Those years kept continuing, and work was still difficult and challenging, and I was starting to sort of lose the zap and excitement about it, and our workplace had expanded, so we had internal challenges. 2009, I remember it wasn't a bad year, and then there was a couple of weeks towards the end of the year where it was stinking hot. I don't know whether everyone can remember that, but it was the first time we realised what El Nino can do in terms of heat, and there was 40 degrees all through Melbourne Cup week and around that time, and a lot of crops went from, you know, being $2,000 a hectare potential to $200 a hectare. Like, the Wimmera got cooked literally, and you could just see the disappointment on their faces and trying to do their cropping plans, and they were just flat as, and so was I. And so I really started to, I think then it was really starting to take its toll. And 2010 came along, great year, and that was the year of the floods. And so all of a sudden, you know, people had, and you could see they were going to be okay that year, but the floods were very distressing, particularly for some individuals. And I'd really lost empathy by this stage, because I was thinking to myself, hang on a minute, you're sitting on a $3 million asset and I've got a $100,000 home. Stop your bloody whinging. That was what was going on in my head. But my cup was full, and towards the end of that year, I was pretty useless. And one day I couldn't get out of bed, and I thought, oh, okay, I'm in a bit of trouble here. So I took myself off to the GP. And then that started a whole new journey of seeing how small country towns and health services weren't that well equipped, and were still not getting the messages out, and didn't understand how to get people onto mental health plans, and the shortage of decent, you know, psychology services. But luckily I had some personal contacts that could help me navigate all that. So I ended up started seeking some professional help around that period, and I guess I've been on that journey ever since. It was interesting. Part of that, I actually went and had my sister used to live overseas, and I went and had 2 weeks with her in Laos, and basically great holiday for 2 weeks in that early January, and that was when the really big flood occurred, the one up in Toowoomba, and the Wimmera River was about 20 k's wide. So by the time I came back, I remember getting my, they got some blood tests done when I first presented in December, just to check thyroid and hormones and all those things. And the 2 nurses that were on duty were both from farms, and all they wanted to do was talk about the floods and the effect on their crops. And here's me with my arm out, you know, getting this blah, blah, blah. I'm in there for mental health reasons, and they're hammering me. And I said to them at the time, look, you'll be right, and this is what I reckon your barley's worth, and blah, 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 blah. And so I gave them a pep talk. I went back that January, and I had to go and get another blood test. And I've walked in, and this woman's gone to me, you told me it was going to be all right. And that's when I got back in the car after that blood test, and I thought, I think this could be my last year of farm consulting agronomy. I'm over this. Yeah, so it did take its toll after a while.
Kate, it just sounds like a really long, slow burn. Like a
yeah,
like just that chronic stress rather than a bang, you know,
absolutely.
An episode, just a long.
Yeah. And my personality type is that I am prone to stress, and that's another family trait. One of my brothers is nicknamed the Stress Monster by my uni mates. And that little bit of, natural anxiety there, and just chronic stress. Like when I did the DAS test, depression, anxiety and stress test they use as a bit of a screening tool, my stress was off the charts. So that's something.
But did you not have that awareness at that stage? Were you sort of?
Oh, I did. I'd just been in denial.
But you just squashed it down. You were in denial.
Yeah. I just kept on going, and I would just I'd drop off all the fun things to make time to do the stuff that needed to be done. Like I wouldn't go to golf. I'd stay home and, renovate the doors to go back on the house, because that job needed to be done. It's just, family work ethic.
Yeah. So it's really interesting what you're saying. There's the work ethic. There's the kind of, pretty no fuss, just get on with things. The sort of, like the stoic, just keep going.
And that's what I've learned, is that stoicism isn't resilience. Stoicism's actually a recipe for disaster.
Great. So what is resilience?
Good question. Well, one of the definitions that I like is that it's staying well and being able to be productive, rather than this, people think about resilience and bouncing back. And I actually think it's more about being malleable or pliable than bouncing back. But it's just putting stuff in place so that you can do what you need to get to do, whether it's uncomfortable or not uncomfortable, but not compromise your health at the same time. That's what I reckon it is.
And Kate, just because I know you, and I hope it's okay to ask you a leading question about this, but just in your experience with mental health, like, it isn't just I've fixed it, is it?
No. No.
So sort of tell me more about how that plays, how that plays out for you and how you sort of manage that.
And I guess that's why it's important. One of the things I think you don't understand when you're starting this journey and you go off to seek help, you actually think you are going off to get it fixed. Well, I did, and I'm like, well, hang on, when am I going to not feel like this anymore? And oh, this isn't working, and oh, this medication's not much chop, it's actually not doing much. And and then you realise that, well, in my case, because I've got what they call in the old days they'd call it chronic depression, or now I think it's called persistent depressive disorder and mixed anxiety and depression. Like it's there for life. I've got to manage it, and it's not the pills on their own won't manage it. Going to talk to someone management, it's actually doing the work on yourself and changing things over time, and actually being comfortable with feeling uncomfortable. And that's really taken 10 years to get to that conclusion. Like, I used to get very anxious about being anxious, or be angsty about feeling depressed, and it's only probably been the last 2 or 3 years that the pennies dropped that that's life, and that's going to keep on happening, and then you just have to deal with it. And as you know, Synth, I had a bit of an episode a few months ago, triggered by some grief and a few other things, and so now I know, well, when that's happened, I give myself permission to soothe myself and be kind, and sort of wrap yourself up in the cocoon and just do what you need to do to get back and get functioning, and don't beat yourself up about it. But it's certainly, it's an ongoing journey, and I've done a lot of work, and probably more work than most would do, but it's certainly been rewarding.
And Kate, we were talking earlier when we were chatting about this interview, one of the participants last week was sharing that she was finding it, we were talking about blokes, you work with a lot of blokes, and one of the participants, Belle, last week was just sharing, you know, her husband sort of was again the stoic, probably going into himself, not talking a lot about, and we were talking about, given you work with a lot of blokes, and I think it's blokes, but I think there's also this, again, that stoicism, that rural, rural mindset.
Yep.
What's your advice for people who, how do you be with someone and support someone else who's struggling, number one? And then number two, just go number one. How do you support someone who might be struggling?
Look, I reckon it's a really hard question. I think there's a couple of bits to it. It's, you know, are they like, where are they in their struggle? Like, are they slightly miserable, a little bit miserable, grumpy, or are they actually in danger? I think if they're on the milder side of things, probably, you know, maybe in my experience, if someone had actually said to me, look, we've been watching you, we don't think you're yourself, is there anything we can do to help? You know, who knows how I may have answered that question, but a lot of, like, basically no one had any idea with me. I didn't even know I was hiding it, but obviously I was very good at hiding it. I made a mistake once of approaching someone and suggesting they needed help, and they, on reflection, it probably wasn't my role to do that. So I'd be, certainly if it's your loved one and someone within, that it is your role to look after them. You know, I think that's okay. But if it's in a wider friendship group, I'd just be really mindful of boundaries. But certainly if someone is at risk, well, then that's a different story for sure. And, you know, one suggestion I've made to people is to go actually and get a mental health care plan yourself and talk to someone and ask them how to deal with what you're seeing at home.
No, that's great advice. And I'm just conscious of time. We could talk forever.
Yeah.
So, Kate, just interested. So we've got a couple of questions. Megan, we've seen your really awesome question, which we'll get to.
The one about the resilience.
Yeah. We'll just finalise this part of the session. But so, what would your top tips, whether it be 3 tips, be for people on the call today, with regards to well-being and looking after their well-being?
Yeah, the first one is that whole kindness thing, and I didn't know what that meant when people were trying to tell me to be kind to myself, and then I worked out that it's actually dropping the judgment. So not judging yourself and being conscious of how you impose your judgments on others.
Yeah.
So a good test is if you keep saying I should or you should, you know, you're putting judgments on there. So that'd be the first one. And really look after you, because you're no good to anyone else if you're battling. And as mothers, or as, you know, women in households, leaders in your community and in workplaces, we are so ingrained at putting ourselves after everybody else. So writing a no list.
Yeah.
I think that's really important. And shut up. I think at the moment, and this has been a really hard one for me, is, you know, you do want to intervene and solve every problem, and people will be dickheads and say dumb stuff at the moment. And you know, some of the best advice I've had is just go into another room. Not like, now's not the time to be fixing all the issues in your life. We've just got to get through this, and particularly for all the people living at home with and with kids at home and 2 adults working from home. Yeah, avoidance is okay at the moment, I reckon. It's an easier way to live sometimes.
Terrific. Thank you, Kate, for that, for all those gems that you've shared with us. And I'll hand over to Louise to manage some questions.
Thank you. So, are there any specific questions for Kate to address, potentially about what we haven't covered off, or you want further clarification, or from Kate's experience you want more information? We'd love to hear that. We're definitely hearing some reassuring thanks for you, Kate, which is lovely.
I'm happy to tackle Megan's comments about the resilience bit, if you like, because I totally get it.
So what did Megan actually...
So Megan asked, saying that the word resilience is giving her a sort of a negative or anxious reaction, because it's so used now in terms of, you know, communities need to be resilient and get over bushfires and drought and feed prices, and I think that's an understandable reaction, because it is difficult with somebody in a suit and tie telling you that you need to be more resilient. I think it is a word. I've got an intolerance to overuse of words, and I think resilient is one of those words that can be overused. But if you take it in the terms of when dealing with yourself, that it's really about staying well so that you can be productive, I think that's not a bad way to think about it. And yeah, so I hope that helps, Megan. But I hear you.
I'll just jump over, Kate. There's in our Q&A. Have you found mental health services improving across your regional area? And how would you describe access to these services in general terms for rural and regional communities?
Well, to be frank, I reckon they're shit house. Sadly, I still see a psychologist in Melbourne, and it wasn't probably the turning point in my mental health journey was moving to Melbourne and seeing a Collins Street GP who had access to a gun psychologist who happened to be rural born and bred. So she was a Manangatang girl, went to boarding school in Ballarat, so really understood the rural issues, and, you know, and high quality. There's just not enough services in rural and regional Australia. And quite often you can't get access to counsellors who can take you so far, but you can't get access to psychologists to do that deep work that most of us need to do. So it's a blight. There you go.
Louise, Charlie was just repeating a question from Estelle earlier. Did you see that one?
I'm just picking that up. Thanks, Charlie. So a lot of burnout comes from...
Burnout, a lot of burnout comes.
Thank you. A lot of burnout comes from the slow burn. So how do we acknowledge the indicators to ourselves? And secondly, why do we resist self-acknowledgement?
Yeah, good question. And I've often thought about this, and I think at the time, when I go back to 2006, I reckon it was shame. And at that stage, you know, my experience with mental health and mental illness was, you know, we got family members and family friends that had quite severe mental illness in terms of schizophrenia and things like that, and I guess the people with depression were seen as weak, and there was still a bit of a stigma about that, and what would people in the community say, and and even in the workplace, I think in my corporate workplaces weren't ready to deal with people who, openly talked about it. So I never revealed it at all when I was in Melbourne, because it would have been career suicide. And I think everyone is realising now that, you know, a large portion of the population has mental health experiences at certain times, so it is actually quite normal.
Yeah.
But there's still that stigma that exists, and people who haven't been through it or haven't had exposure to it don't know how to deal with it, and that's what keeps us away from dealing with it.
There was another question there from Estelle, just scrolling through, about have you had the opportunity, I'm just trying to remember, to speak about your mental health in your local community, Kate? If you have, how was that received?
No, look, I haven't. This is the first time I've actually openly talked about it, apart from people who are, I suppose, in my inner circle in various aspects of my life. There's usually, you know, a small trusted group that know my history, and so I haven't done that, no.
How are you feeling right now, having shared it with the biggest?
Oh, a bit vulnerable, to be honest. Thinking, what the hell have I done? But the reason I chose to do it was, it's normal, and we've got to, you know, I don't want to become the woman who talks about her mental health. Like mental health advocates that do that, I think that's great. But to me, it's just normal, and it's a part of life. And, you know, I'm just another person who deals with it.
Thank you.
Oh, Kate, we feel so honoured, and there's lots of comments in the chat box that are saying, I feel very emotional right now.
So we should. Yeah. Bloody legend.
You are.
Reading some of the comments. You rock. Awesome.
Mm-hmm.
I think we need to hear this information. And I'm saying that because I'm a bit of a city slicker. So I do have access to, that type of professional help if it's required.
Actually, one thing, sorry, Louise, just in case people are wondering, one thing that I think is important to people understand, it's actually really simple process to get access to mental health services that are Medicare refundable. What you need to do is go to a GP and ask for a mental health care plan. That mental health care plan will give you up to 6 visits, and then you can take that mental health care plan to a mental health provider, so a psychologist or a counsellor. And so your GP may have somebody, or you may have someone in mind, but the first step is to go to a GP, and you can do it over telehealth now, to get that mental health care plan.
Okay, I'm hoping people taking note of that. I'm typing up notes as we speak, and Cynthia will be issuing our themed notes, so that will reinforce that valuable information.
And sometimes you have to actually tell GPs that. I actually had to tell, they're a lot better now, but I actually had to tell them what I needed, because they didn't, the particular GP didn't understand and didn't give me the right stuff. So I was just very lucky that I have a brother in the mental health system who, and another friend who also worked in the system, and they were able to tell me what I had to say the next time I went to the GP. So it took me 2 or 3 goes to the GP to act before I could get a referral. Yeah, that was a bit of a, yeah. I mean, this was 10 years ago, but it wasn't easy.
And I'm assuming it's still not easy for some, especially, let's say, in remote parts of Australia. We can always improve.
Hopefully one thing that might come out of telehealth in this crisis is more use of those services, and that we can make a bit of a shift to enable people to connect in a different way. Like, we do a lot of our coaching online, and I know it's a different mode or a skill, but you can still achieve a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So, how about, Cynthia, just the last few minutes, let's receive through the chat room, given what we've discussed, what we've heard, great advice and very personal human story from Kate, what are you going to do with what you have heard today? So let's receive that. We'll read a few out before we finish off.
Because it's really nice to have a little chat with each other. But we also would really love it if you can take more from that chat and actually take an action as a result that will impact positively on your own well-being at the moment. So we want you to do a little bit of work, a little bit of homework.
Do you want me to read them out, Cynthia, or you?
Yeah, do you want to, Louise?
Yes, so Lisa, who is a frequent flyer, rereads some of my I'm assuming mental health FA manuals. Someone can fill that in for me.
Mental health first aid, she'd be referring.
Yes, and so Lisa mentioned through the chat that she'd recently completed the course, so that's something we should all be looking into. That made a big change. Never assume that someone who appears confident and well together is doing okay. From Di Bells. Hi, Di.
Hi, Di.
I'm freezing up here.
Pina?
Yes, to be more kind to myself and stop analysing. Thank you. Melva, ignore and shut up. Walk away from engaging. Yes, so that was moving into another room. A no list, Annalise picked up, and Virginia Brooke, follow up the Amy Silver and Resilience Project websites, both shared. I know that Ruth shared.
Thanks, Ruth.
Silver, which is great. I can't remember who shared the Resilience Project websites that was mentioned. A doorway, Lisa again, a doorway to great is great to use to walk into another room. Yes, I think a lot of us are concurring with that. Get a change of scenery. Don't be afraid to ask for help. Anthea Morrison mentioned. That's great. So I'm hoping that you are writing these down, and we'll be following up next week, won't we, Cynthia?
Yes, definitely. And I've just seen a comment from Andrew from Red Cross. The Red Cross drought coordinators are working on an advocacy piece which includes changing the language we use, particularly around the mental health aspects of dealing with drought. Cynthia and we can chat more about this. Great.
Right. That's such a great point. That whole language piece mentioned earlier about, you know, the overuse of the term resilience. So I'm hoping that gets involved. Jodie, be just as kind to myself as I am to other people. So one of Kate's tips was, you know, put yourself first. Elizabeth, am not going to try and reorganise all of the things in my life and complete all of the to-do projects. Yeah, let's just leave our kitchen cupboards as they are and focus on what's more important, I say. And in difficult times, Jenny, compassion is all we've got. Yeah, love that. But beware of compassion fatigue. Yeah, I think that's probably all in our minds.
Yeah. So just one thing there in terms of the tips is about boundaries. And it's boundaries that help you protect you from compassion fatigue, in my view. Because you can't take on everyone else's stress.
Yeah.
Yeah. So right.
I'm mentally seeing that farmer, Blaze, putting up new fences around the farm and contain what, is in your control.
Yeah, and also, if you've got friends that are really, really leaning on you, but what they actually need is a mental health professional. It's I'm not sure how you get them there, but you have to protect yourself from that too.
Yeah, I think that's right. We had actually Charlie was talking a little bit about that last week of Charlie, hope you don't mind me mentioning, but just that there was, in these times some people get leaned on a lot, and that takes, that can take a lot of energy from you. So, like you said, Kate, earlier about your cup was full and was actually overflowing. So again, maybe part of it is actually being mindful of who you're spending time around and making sure that you are spending time with people who give you some stuff, fill you up. And again, that's part of our own, I think sometimes we, our overdone strength of compassion and caring, you overdo a strength when it's to the detriment of you or someone else. So if we care too much, that can take a lot from us. So, so Louise, Kate, I just want to say a huge thank you for today and for all our participants. I'm so sorry again we didn't get to see all your chat, but on the recording, all the chat will be available. I will send you all an email on hopefully Friday that will have the recording link in case you want to share it with someone who missed out, and also to announce our next week's guest, who I've just had a little oh my god, she's fantastic.
Yes.
Oh my god,
Do you want me to have a quick
massive what a massive fail. Anyway, I will announce our next exciting guest in the email that you will get through the weekend. Oh my god.
I'm hoping I can help you, Cynthia.
Sorry.
What are you two are trying?
Chantel Thompson. Thompson. So Chantel Thompson, who is a jiu-jitsu Olympian gold medalist. And she's an Indigenous woman. She lives at the moment in Melbourne and is actually isolating in Mildura at the moment. She's got a really wonderful metaphor of the warrior within, and she's super passionate. She talks a lot about how she was the first in her family to, so she didn't really have role models in terms of things to aspire to, so she's paved the way all along so her determination, her somehow she's become a world champion in jiu-jitsu, and she's just so open and authentic and honest, and I think that all of our guests have been so far, with Di Bowles as well, and Shan last week, and beautiful Kate today. So that's what we really hope you're getting out of these sessions, people who are just open and honest and willing to speak about their life experience so that we all benefit. So I'll shut the recording off now, and there's lots of thank yous on the chat box. So thanks everyone, we'll see you next week. And for those who'd like to stick around and just keep having a chat, we'll keep the session open. See you next week.